The microphone is a bullshit detector. The most remarkable bullshit detector.
I don't think I've ever heard someone describe podcasting in a way that feels more accurate and more terrifying. Because it's true. You can hide behind a lot of things in this business: branding, strategy, the right equipment, the perfect format, the spreadsheet that tells you exactly how many clips you're supposed to post every week. Then you sit down in front of a microphone. And eventually, people figure out if there's actually something there. Alan Katz has spent his career telling stories. He came up through Hollywood, working on projects like Tales from the Crypt, where getting an idea from your head into the world could involve years of work, a lot of people making decisions, and a lot of things changing along the way. Podcasting gave him a very different kind of creative freedom. You can make the thing, you can tell the story, you can put it in front of people. That sounds simple, but it's a pretty radical shift when you think about it. And that's what I wanted to talk with Alan about, the part of podcasting that gets buried under all the advice about growth and monetization and building your brand. The actual craft of making something people want to spend time with. I'm David Beckmeyer, and this is Monetize This, the podcast about podcasting and the strange economy we've all decided to participate in. Before we get into today's episode, it's time for my favorite segment, evidence that at least 3 people are listening. This week's Monetize This listener review comes from Alex. They wrote, "From the first moment I heard this podcast, I knew I was going to be a long-term listener. Instantly loved it. David is a great host, and I love the humor that he brings to some serious topics that most people in podcasting want to skip over. Thank you for this podcast." First of all, thank you, Alex. Second, I'm glad someone understands what I'm doing here because I'm not so sure myself. And third, if you want to be featured on the show, leave a review. Not because the algorithm demands it, and not just because some podcast bro told me reviews are the secret to hitting 10,000 downloads in 30 days. Podcasting is a lonely business sometimes, and I seriously do love hearing what you think. Now, back to our episode. Alan came to podcasting after decades in Hollywood, where getting a story made is basically a long negotiation with a very small group of people.
I was in the movie and TV business. I used to do a show for HBO called Tales from the Crypt, and to take an idea from my head, turn it into a movie or TV project, a TV series. The average is 10 years. 10 years, and that's if you're lucky enough to get someone to pony up a little bit of dosh so you can, to actually produce it. But 10 years from an idea to any kind of production. That's a long time to, and it's a low odds bet. Really, the odds are entirely stacked against you. And then, or if you're lucky enough and again, you've done all this writing, you've written a script. If it's a TV series, you've had to write a Bible too. Well, your script was the pilot. That's season 1, episode 1. What happens episode 2 and 3, 4, 5? What happens the rest of season 1 and season 2, season 3? Who are all these characters? What's the tone? What does it look like? What does it feel like? That's 70, 80, 90 pages. It didn't write itself. That takes a long time to write. And as you write that informs the script. You're going to be rewriting the script a bunch of times too while you're working on that Bible. The amount of work is staggering. And then when you've got all the creative material ready, and again, you're not selling this to the public. You're trying to sell it to a handful of executives. Now, should I be lucky enough for them to say, yes, we like this, we're going to develop this, and they'll put money into it? Well, before I can get paid, I must sign a certificate of authorship, a C of A. And this has to do with the nature of film and TV distribution. You can't have some writer, asshole, saying, I hate the politics and country. In that country, you can't distribute there. You can't have that. So, in essence, when you sign the C of A, whatever they pay you, whatever you're going to be paid, you don't own it anymore. You have given up all rights to this in perpetuity throughout the known universe. All that hard work, and you're cut out of it. You will not be the person who makes the most money off of this, if anybody makes any money off of this. The writer, the originator of the material, you most certainly will not be. Now, if I take the same idea and I turn it into a podcast, well, I can write, produce, distribute, that's the key, distribute, monetize, and collect on that monetization without involving anybody in an executive suite. I can tell the story exactly the way I want it. My one obligation is to the audience. Do not bore them.
And that's really the thing. Podcasting didn't just create another place to publish. It changed who gets to decide what stories exist. Which brings us to the conundrum. I named this show Monetize This. It's supposed to be ironic. I know, risky move. Naming a podcast something that sounds exactly like the thing you're making fun of is basically a comedy trust fall. E.B. White once said, "Explaining a joke is like dissecting a frog. You understand it better, but the frog dies in the process." But anyway, Alan has some things to say about the topic.
Whoever can say no has the power. And this is a way to flip the power dynamic from the money to the creatives where the power belongs. Because it'd be nice to have their money, but I don't need their money. And that's the way it should be. Podcasting, because of the distribution, anybody can distribute a podcast to everywhere. It's quite doable. It's the distribution that makes podcasting so incredibly powerful. Now, lots and lots of us are making podcasts. It's still about making great content. That's on each and every one of us who podcasts. Make great content, and hopefully the world will come listen. But success comes in many different flavors. One of the ways that I see it, when I look at the stories I've gotten to tell since I started podcasting full time, and the people that I've gotten to meet and work with, I'm a wealthy man, as far as I'm concerned. The actual cash money is icing. One could not acquire these riches any other way.
The advice industry often starts with, how do we turn this into revenue? Alan starts somewhere else. How do we make something worth listening to? Because if you're making a podcast only because somebody in a YouTube video ensured you there were riches galore, you might have picked the wrong medium.
If you're getting into podcasting for the money, it's going to be disappointing, probably. It requires tremendous patience and dedication to telling your story the most you way you possibly can, because that's everybody's secret sauce. The way that they would tell a story. Whether it's their story or someone else's story, it's our unique vision.
And this is where I think Alan is describing something a lot of podcasters quietly understand. Success has more than one definition. Sometimes the value is the audience, sometimes it's the relationships, sometimes it's the work itself. Of course, saying don't obsess over formulas is dangerous advice in podcasting, because there's an entire industry built around selling formulas. The 7 steps, the secret framework, the exact structure that every successful podcast supposedly follows. Alan has a more complicated relationship with formulas.
Formulas are good to get you started if you don't really know how to do a certain thing. That's why YouTube videos are great. How do I fix this thing? How do I set this thing up? A formula is like a YouTube video for how to get it started. Now, the thing about a writing project or a podcast, fixing a thing or getting a machine started is a repetitive process. But a podcast, each and every one is a singular event. And if that gets repetitious, you'll lose your audience rather quickly, because been there, done that. So the obligation is to know your franchise. What is your podcast about? What story are you telling? Again, your franchise, the broad sense, but okay, in this particular episode, we're going to tell this little teeny piece of it from this particular perspective or from this particular perspective. And it's really, if you understand your franchise, then you can break it down into its minutiae and run for a very long time with your podcast. Really, and then the secret is be honest. Get to the absolute core honesty. The one thing I learned late in life is that the truth will set you free. It absolutely will.
A formula can help you start, it can teach you the mechanics, but the moment the formula becomes the thing you're making, you've created the podcast equivalent of a factory that only makes one product. And eventually, your audience notices, because humans are very good at detecting when something feels manufactured.
The microphone is a bullshit detector. The most remarkable bullshit detector. You have to be as emotionally honest as you possibly can be at those key moments when the script says you got to be angry or sad or happy. You can't act it. You got to be it.
There's something really interesting about audio. A camera can capture what somebody looks like. A microphone captures something much harder to fake. Intent, emotion, whether somebody actually believes what they're saying. This is probably where Alan's background as a storyteller shows up the most, because podcasting has created a weird problem. We have more people publishing than ever before, but a lot of shows are still just information delivery systems. A topic, a guest, some questions, done. Alan sees the medium differently.
Writing and podcasting need to be intimately connected. And even if you do a live podcast every week, you still got to know the story that you're telling. The more that you compose it inside your head, the more that you understand it from the perspective of its beginning, middle, and end, the better you will be at not just telling it, but allowing the story to relate to other people.
And this idea that every creator has their own way of telling a story is actually something Alan built his company around. And I want to pause here because Alan was generous enough to spend time with me talking about this stuff. He's not just someone with opinions about storytelling. This is literally his work.
That's what my company does. And when we work with other podcasters, in essence, they're the story. And the way that I think of it, I'm the storyteller. And I'm going to take your story and refract it through the prism inside my head. And all the attributes of your story, but it will reflect another editorial perspective here. There is some perspective on that story that the actual storyteller could not possibly have. And in that way, the goal is to, if you know who the painter Paul Cézanne was, he had a way of painting a piece of fruit like he literally was walking around it and was painting it from every side. How the hell was he doing that? Well, that's the way that I like to approach a story. The feeling that, you really have seen it from all the perspectives. And so that as it progresses, you really and truly understand why all the characters are doing what they're doing and why that makes it funnier, why that makes it sadder, more tragic, more exciting, more human. Yeah, more human.
Alan's company is called Costard and Touchstone, and even the name tells you a lot about how he thinks.
My company, Costard and Touchstone, why Costard and Touchstone? In my very brief acting career, I did, before I quit, I was in 2 Shakespearean plays. I played the part of Costard in Love's Labour's Lost and the part of Touchstone in As You Like It. Both characters are wise fools who speak truth to power. And that's what my company is and does. We are a wise fool, speaking truth to power. Our mission, as we say in our little mission statement, is to make the world a better place through storytelling.
I love this because honestly, that description feels very aligned with what we're doing here. A little bit of storytelling, a little bit of questioning the people who claim to have all the answers, a little bit of speaking truth to power. And this is where Alan's own podcast journey becomes the perfect example, because his first major podcast wasn't a marketing funnel. It wasn't a lead magnet. It was a story he needed to tell.
During the pandemic, a Tales from the Crypt fan group, 3 fathers from various parts of the country, One of the dads, they were doing a podcast called Dads from the Crypt. They reviewed all the episodes of Tales from the Crypt and gave parenting advice. One of the dads reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're going to be reviewing one of the episodes you wrote. You want to sit in with us?" And that sounded fun, like funny. So I said, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." And it was fun. We had a great time. When we made Tales from the Crypt, we also made a couple of feature films. And the first was a very good feature called Demon Knight. It's a classic. And the second is a fiasco. Now, the audience doesn't know it's a fiasco, but it was a fiasco. It was not the movie we were supposed to make. It was a cynical exercise. And every day, making Tales from the Crypt was really, and virtually everyone who worked on that show would tell you it was a singular creative experience because of all the creative freedom we had to just do our jobs. Doing that second Tales from the Crypt feature film, Bordello of Blood, was the antithesis to everything about doing Tales from the Crypt. We were doing the movie for a cynical reason and really an awful lot of the creative choices that were made by the executives and by us, we made a lot of stupid, cynical choices that bit us in the ass. For me, it was a personal Waterloo. It was soul crushing. And that was kind of the impetus for the 2 decades that I ended up spiraling into darkness. It really came out of that. So when one of the dads from the Crypt said, after that first successful appearance, "Hey, we're going to be reviewing Bordello of Blood in a few weeks. You want to come in, sit in with us?" I said, "Jason, the story of making that piece of shit is not a half-hour conversation with you. It's a podcast unto itself." And that was the motivation for the first season of my first podcast, the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. The first season was subtitled The Making of Bordello of Blood. And I wanted to tell the absolute honest start to finish story in my creative career, but Tales from the Crypt, and why Bordello of Blood was its antithesis. And just a view of Hollywood at its best and Hollywood at its fucking worst. And what that can do to a person trying to navigate one's life. Doing that podcast was cathartic. In fact, Entertainment Weekly called it the best film podcast of 2022. And the reason that Clark Collis wrote those very kind words is because of the honesty with which it was told and done.
One of the biggest advantages podcasting has is that it lets people tell stories that probably would never survive the traditional gatekeeper process. Because sometimes the weirdest stories are the ones people actually want.
A friend from school approached me. Now, he had something that had actually happened to him. He wanted to turn into a TV series. Now, I told you the process of making the TV series, that's a decade. And I suggested, no, you don't want to do it that way. You want to do it as a podcast instead. And the idea, I think I was quite right about it. My friend worked his way through medical school in the mid-90s as an anonymous sperm donor. Jump forward 27 years, he was a successful radiologist, and a new company called 23andMe opened shop. And he was fascinated by the idea of getting a hold of his health genes. It never occurred to him the ramifications of adding his DNA to a growing DNA database. That's what 23andMe and Ancestry are. If you send your DNA in, he lost his donor anonymity. Suddenly, 7 total strangers found daddy, except 6 of them had no idea their actual biological father was a sperm donor, this guy. And the 7th was one of the daughters, and she had known for about a year that she was donor conceived and had been looking for him. And she brought a thing called genetic sexual attraction to the table. Now, I did Tales from the Crypt, I did Outer Limits, a lot of horror and sci-fi. I got a taste for weird material, okay? I got a taste for the weird. So when my friend told me his story, well, that was one of the weirdest fucking things I'd ever heard. You couldn't make that up. But damn, did I want to tell that story. And podcasting, because I could tell the whole story. I didn't have to worry about some executive getting all uncomfortable because the subject matter was really out there. In fact, the point of the exercise was to tell the story with bracing honesty. And the audience will react to the characters as they react to the characters. My goal was to tell the story honestly. And that was my first story podcast, The Donor.
There's a lot of talk about podcasting as a business. The downloads, the rankings, the growth charts, the endless conversation about what you're supposed to do next. And sure, all of that exists. But every once in a while, it's worth remembering what's actually happening when somebody puts on a pair of headphones and listens to your voice.
The wonderful thing about this medium is that it's theater of the mind. When you consider how people consume podcasts, it's most of the time through a set of earphones or headphones or earbuds, or in a car is really just a giant sound pod. They're taking our voices and our stories and putting them inside their ears into the most intimate of spaces, inside their heads. Well, that's a really great place to be. It's an honor to be there. It comes with a lot of responsibility. People have to trust you to want to put you in that particular space. They have to trust your veracity, your integrity. And the minute you lose that, the minute you lose them, you've lost them.
Theater of the mind. That's really the strange magic of podcasting. There's no camera telling people what to see. There's no set, no special effects. It's just a voice, sounds, a story, and whatever the listener brings with them. That's a pretty incredible thing to be trusted with. And maybe that's why the microphone is such a good bullshit detector. People aren't just listening for information. They're listening for whether there's a real person on the other side of it. Alan Katz spent a career telling stories through other mediums, and now he's using this one because it gives creators something pretty rare, the chance to tell the story in their own voice. And that's probably the part worth holding on to. Before you worry about optimizing the podcast, before you worry about monetizing it, make something worthy of the sacred space between their ears. Oh wait, it's time for the outro. That's it for this episode of Monetize This. Quick favor before we get back to ruining podcast advice forever. If you listen to Monetize This and you've ever laughed or disagreed, yelled at your headphones, or thought, wow, this guy is aggressively overthinking podcasting, I'd love it if you left a review. I know, every podcast says this. Somewhere there's a podcast guru selling a $9.97 course called Review Request Framework, and this is probably one of the steps. But honestly, reviews mean a lot. I read them. They make me smile. They remind me there are actual humans listening on the other side of this weird little audio experiment. And if you leave one, you're not just helping this show, you're helping another podcaster who is tired of hearing that they need to optimize their podcast funnel, build a personal brand ecosystem, and wake up at 4:30 a.m. to become a content machine. You're basically helping them find their people, which is a pretty good use of 30 seconds. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.